I had one job that morning: get through security, board the plane, and sit in the courtroom before the clerk called my name. But an airport police officer stepped into my path like he had been waiting for me. He said four words that made the terminal feel like a trap. "Ma'am, come with us." I knew exactly who set it up. My parents were not trying to beat me in probate court. They were trying to erase me from it. My name is Olivia Green, and at 34 years old, I had never been on the wrong side of a police interrogation table until that Tuesday morning. The air inside Denver International Airport was thin and recycled, smelling faintly of floor wax and stale coffee. It was 4 in the morning, an hour that does not exist for the living, but rather for the desperate and the transient. I belonged to the former category. I stood near the North Security checkpoint, gripping a manila folder so tight my knuckles had turned the color of old parchment. The folder was standard office supply beige, but I had written 3 words on the front in thick black marker: "Estate, do not bend." That instruction was not just for the documents inside, it was a command to myself. Do not bend, do not fold, do not break. I was flying to Florida, specifically to the Pinellas County Probate Court, for a hearing that would determine the fate of my grandfather, Walter Green's legacy. The hearing was scheduled for 9 in the morning, Eastern Standard Time. I had calculated the logistics down to the minute. I would land in Tampa by 8, rent a car, and drive across the bridge just as the courthouse doors were unlocking. There was zero margin for error. My parents knew that. Douglas and Renee Green. Even thinking their names caused a spike of adrenaline in my chest that felt like a chemical burn. For the last 7 days, they had been a constant, suffocating presence in my life. They had not screamed or shouted. That was not their style. They were masters of the soft weapon, the concern that strangled you. They had called me 10 times a day, their voices dripping with a performative worry that made me question my own sanity. They kept saying that I was too emotional to handle the legal proceedings. They told me that Grandfather Walter's death had unmoored me and that I needed to rest. Not fight. We will handle it. Olivia. That was their mantra. Just stay in Denver and rest. You will only complicate things if you come down here. I adjusted my grip on the folder. I was wearing my court clothes, a navy blazer, and tailored trousers because there would be no time to change once I landed. The airport was beginning to wake up. Business travelers were checking their watches, and families were wrestling with strollers. I joined the line for the security checkpoint, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Every second felt critical. I watched the digital clock on the wall tick from 4:15 to 4:16. I needed to be airside. I needed to be on that plane. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, already knowing who it was. The screen lit up with a notification: "Missed call, Mom." Immediately following the call, a text message appeared. I stared at the gray bubble, the words glowing with a menacing clarity. "Turn around. You don't want to do this." It was not a question. It was not a plea. It was a directive. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the airport air conditioning. They knew I was here. Of course they knew. They probably had my flight itinerary. I shoved the phone back into my pocket, refusing to reply. I would not engage. I would not give them the satisfaction of knowing they had rattled me. I stepped forward as the line moved, placing my plastic bin on the conveyor belt. I went through the motions with the robotic efficiency of a frequent flyer. Shoes off, laptop out, liquids in a clear bag, jacket off. I placed the folder on top of my laptop. I did not want it out of my sight, but I had no choice. I watched it glide into the black maw of the X-ray machine. I stepped toward the metal detector, waiting for the Transportation Security Administration agent to wave me through. But the wave never came. Instead, a man stepped into my path. He was not wearing the blue shirt of a TSA agent. He was wearing the dark uniform of the airport police. He was tall, with a shaved head and a posture that suggested he was ready for violence but hoping for compliance. He did not look at the people behind me. He looked only at me. His eyes were flat and unreadable. He stood between me and the metal detector, a physical wall blocking my path to the gate, to the plane, to the courtroom. The noise of the terminal seemed to drop away. leaving me in a vacuum of silence. "Ma'am, come with us." The words were quiet. They were final. They were not a request. I froze. My first instinct was to ask why, but my throat had seized up. I looked past him, toward the conveyor belt where my belongings were emerging. My laptop, my shoes, the folder, they were sitting there, exposed and vulnerable. I took a half step to the side, trying to maintain eye contact with my property. "I need my things," I said, my voice sounding thin and foreign to my own ears. "We will collect your belongings, ma'am," the officer said. His hand hovered near his belt. It was a subtle movement, but I saw it. He was treating me as a potential threat. "Please step out of the line, now." The people behind me had gone still. I could feel their eyes on my back. The irritation of the morning rush had been replaced by a voyeuristic curiosity. To them, I was no longer a fellow traveler. I was a problem. I was a suspect. I was someone who had done something wrong. I felt a flush of heat crawl up my neck. I was being stripped of my dignity in front of 200 strangers. I stepped out of the line. I had no choice. Two other officers appeared, flanking me. One of them, a woman with a severe expression, went to the conveyor belt and began gathering my items into a large gray bin. She handled the folder with a casual indifference that made me want to scream. That folder contained the only proof that my grandfather had been of sound mind when he changed his will. It contained the evidence that my parents were lying, and now it was in the hands of the police. "Please," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have a flight to catch. It departs in 40 minutes. This must be a mistake. Right this way," the first officer said. He did not acknowledge my flight. He did not acknowledge the mistake. He simply pointed toward a door on the side of the checkpoint area. It was a glass-walled room, visible to everyone, but separated by a layer of soundproof transparency. It was a fishbowl. I walked into the room, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. The officers followed, closing the door behind us. The sound of the terminal, the rolling suitcases, the announcements. The chatter was instantly cut off. The silence in the room was heavy and sterile. There was a metal table and 3 chairs. The officer gestured for me to sit. I remained standing. I needed to feel ready to move. "Sit down, Ms. Green," the officer said. He knew my name. I sat down slowly, my hands gripping the edge of the cold metal table. The female officer placed the gray bin with my belongings on the floor in the corner. Out of my reach, I looked at the folder. It was only 6 feet away, but it might as well have been on the moon. The lead officer pulled out a tablet computer and tapped the screen. He looked at me, then back at the screen, as if he were reading a script that someone else had written for him. His demeanor was professional, but there was an edge to it. He was not looking for a terrorist. He was looking for instability. "Is your name Olivia Green?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "You know it is." "Date of birth." I gave him the date. I gave him my address. I answered the routine questions with mechanical precision, watching the time on the wall clock behind him. 4:25. My boarding group would be called in 10 minutes. "We received a call regarding your travel today," the officer said. He set the tablet down on the table but did not turn it toward me. "The caller stated that you are a public safety threat and that you may cause an incident at the airport." The words hung in the air, absurd and terrifying. A public safety threat. Me. I was an archivist for a historical society. I spent my days in climate-controlled rooms handling paper from the 19th century. I had never even received a speeding ticket. "Who called?" I asked. My voice was harder now. The shock was fading, replaced by a cold, sharp realization. "I cannot disclose that information at this time," the officer said. "But given the nature of the report, we are required to conduct a secondary screening and an interview to determine if you are fit to fly." Fit to fly. That was the phrase. It was vague. It was subjective. It was weaponized. If I raised my voice, I was not fit to fly. If I cried, I was emotionally unstable and not fit to fly. If I argued too aggressively, I was belligerent and not fit to fly. It was a trap. A perfect, bureaucratic trap, designed to keep me in this room until the plane backed away from the gate. I looked at the officer. I really looked at him. He was just doing his job. He had received a tip that used all the right buzzwords: threat, incident, safety. He had to investigate. He was a pawn. I realized then that my parents were not just trying to delay me. They were trying to build a record. If I missed the hearing, that was a victory for them. But if I missed the hearing because I was detained by police for being a public safety threat, that was a checkmate. They could walk into that probate court and tell the judge that their daughter was so unstable she had been pulled off the line at Denver International. They could paint me as dangerous, erratic, and unfit to manage an estate or even my own life. I felt a coldness settle over me. It started in my chest and spread to my fingertips. It was not fear, it was clarity. This was not a misunderstanding. This was an ambush. My parents had swatted me, using the airport police as their personal security force. I looked at the officer, and for the first time, I did not look like a victim. I sat up straighter. I smoothed the lapel of my blazer. I took a slow, deliberate breath. "I am not a threat," I said, keeping my voice level and low. "I am a woman traveling to a court hearing. I have no weapons. I have no history of violence. I have a folder full of legal documents and a boarding pass." The officer watched me, looking for a crack in the facade. "The report said you were agitated," he said, "that you made verbal threats against the safety of the aircraft." I stared at him. The lie was so bold, so specific. Verbal threats against the aircraft. That was a felony. That was a no-fly list triggers. Douglas had gone all in. He was not just trying to stop me. He was trying to ruin me. I have not spoken to anyone since I entered this terminal. I said, "Check the security cameras." I have been silent. I have been standing in line. "We will check everything," the officer said. "But until we resolve this, you are not going anywhere." I looked at the clock. 4:30. Boarding was starting. I could imagine the gate agent picking up the microphone. I could imagine the empty seat with my name on the manifest. I could imagine my parents sitting in their kitchen in Florida, drinking coffee, waiting for the update that I had been stopped. I looked at the folder in the bin. Estate, do not bend. They wanted me to break. They wanted me to scream and throw a chair so the officer would have a reason to arrest me. They wanted the breakdown. I would not give it to them. I folded my hands on the table. I locked eyes with the officer. "Then you better start checking," I said, "because I am going to be on that plane." The officer blinked. He had expected tears. He had expected shouting. He had not expected ice. He picked up the tablet again, his thumb hovering over the screen. "We will see about that," he said. He tapped the screen, and I knew the war had begun. It was not a war of guns or fists. It was a war of minutes, of perception, and of the truth buried in a folder that was currently out of my reach. I sat in the glass box, on display for the world, and prepared to fight for my life without moving a muscle. The airport hummed around us, indifferent and vast. But inside that room, the air was thick with the invisible violence of family. The silence in the glass room was heavier than the air outside. It was a pressurized silence, the kind that usually precedes the click of handcuffs or the reading of rights. The officer sat across from me, his posture rigid, his fingers resting near the edge of the tablet as if he were guarding a grenade. I looked at the digital clock on the wall. 4:45 in the morning. My flight was boarding. The gate agent would be calling Group A right now. I could almost hear the beep of the scanner in my mind. A sound that represented freedom, moving further and further out of reach. I kept my hands visible on the table. That was rule number 1 when dealing with authority figures who have already decided you are a problem. Do not fidget. Do not hide your hands. Do not give them a reason to escalate. I took a breath, measuring it carefully, ensuring it did not sound like a sigh of frustration or a gasp of panic. "Who made the report?" I asked. My voice was steady, stripped of the trembling that was vibrating through my ribcage. I needed a name, even though I already knew the answer. I needed him to say it. I needed it on the record. The officer did not blink. He shook his head slightly, a micro-movement of denial. "We do not release the identity of reporting parties during an active investigation." Ms. Green, especially when the nature of the threat involves potential violence. Violence. The word hung between us. Absurd and terrifying. I have never been violent in my life, I said. The caller stated otherwise. The officer countered. He tapped the screen of his tablet, his eyes scanning a paragraph of text that I could not see. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping an octave, becoming intimate and accusatory. The caller claimed that you stated you would, and I quote, make them pay. I felt the blood drain from my face. Make them pay. It was a phrase I had used 2 days ago, on the phone with my mother. I had said, if you and Dad destroy grandfather's will, you will have to pay the legal fees when I contest it. I had been talking about court costs. I had been talking about financial responsibility, but stripped of context, twisted by a liar, and fed to an airport police officer, it sounded like a promise of physical retribution. I understood then the full scope of what was happening. This was not a random inconvenience. This was a tactical strike. My parents were not just trying to make me miss a flight, they were creating a paper trail. If I missed the hearing today, I would walk into court tomorrow to explain myself. And if I said I was detained by police for making threats, the judge would look at me with suspicion. But if I said my parents lied to the police to stop me, without proof, I would look paranoid. I realized with a sickening clarity that the police report being generated right now was more important to Douglas and Renee than the actual detention. They wanted a document. They wanted a case number. They wanted a sentence they could read aloud in a deposition 6 months from now. Objection. Your Honor, the beneficiary has a history of police detentions at major airports due to violent outbursts. I looked at the officer. I needed to dismantle this narrative before he hit save on that report. Officer, I said, forcing my voice to remain low and clinical, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I am not a threat to this airport. I am not a threat to any passenger. I am a litigant in a high-stakes civil trial. The officer raised an eyebrow. Skeptical. A trial? A probate hearing. I corrected. It is taking place this morning in Pinellas County, Florida. The people who stand to lose the most money if I attend that hearing are my parents. They are the ones who do not want me on that plane. He sat back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. His badge caught the harsh fluorescent light of the room. That is a convenient story, Ms. Green, but we deal with domestic disputes all the time. People do not usually call in bomb threats or mass casualty warnings just to win a civil lawsuit. You would be surprised what people do for $3 million. I said. The number landed. $3 million. It was a gross estimation of the estate's value, but it was enough to make the officer pause. Money was a motive he understood. It was tangible. It was cleaner than vague threats of vengeance. He looked at me for a long moment, assessing. He was trying to reconcile the woman sitting in front of him calm, dressed in a blazer, articulate with the monster described in the dispatch notes. There is more, he said slowly. My stomach twisted. The caller did not just mention today. He said, he glanced at the tablet again. There is an allegation here that you have a history of concerning emergency calls, that this is a pattern of behavior for you, that you have been involved in incidents requiring police intervention before. I stared at him, my mouth going dry. That was a lie, a pure fabrication. I had never called 911 in my life, except once when I saw a car accident on the highway. I had never had the police called on me. This was a new layer of the trap. They were trying to paint me as a frequent flyer, a person known to the system, someone with a thick file of instability. If that is true, I said, my voice hardening, then it should be in your system. Run my background check. Right now, you will find nothing. No arrests, no convictions, no restraining orders, nothing. We are running it, he said dismissal. But these things take time, and the absence of a criminal record does not mean an absence of mental health incidents. The caller specified that these were welfare checks, medical calls, welfare checks, the weapon of the passive-aggressive parent. They could claim they called the police to check on me because I was suicidal, or manic, or unreachable. Even if the police arrived and found me reading a book and drinking tea, the call itself was the weapon, the log was the ammunition, I leaned forward, breaking the rule about not moving. I placed my palms flat on the cold metal table. I want the recording, I said. The officer blinked. Excuse me. I want the original call recording. I repeated. Not your summary, not the notes on that screen. I want the dispatch log and the audio of the call that came in 20 minutes ago. He scoffed. A short, sharp sound of dismissal. You are not in a position to make demands. Ms. Green, this is a preliminary investigation. We do not play DJ for detainees. I am not asking you to play it for entertainment. I said, my intensity rising. I am telling you that the person who made that call committed a crime. Filing a false police report is a crime. Misusing emergency services is a crime. If you listen to that voice, you will hear a man who is not scared. You will hear a man who is reading from a script. You will hear my father. The officer hesitated. He looked at the tablet, then back at me. He was trained to look for deception. He was trained to spot the subtle tics of a liar. But he was looking at a woman who was begging for the evidence to be examined, not hidden. Liars hide evidence. The innocent demand it. I saw the doubt creep into his eyes. It was a small fracture in his certainty, but it was there. If you are wrong, I said, pushing through the opening, you are detaining an innocent woman and aiding in the obstruction of a court case. If I am wrong, then playing the tape changes nothing. Why are you afraid to look at the source? He stared at me for another 10 seconds. The silence stretched, thin and taut. Then, without a word, he reached for the tablet. He did not play the audio. That would have been a breach of protocol he was not willing to make yet. But he tapped into the deeper menu. He went past the summary screen, past the officer notes, and into the raw dispatch data. I watched his eyes. I watched them scan the lines of data, the timestamp, the routing number, and then the caller identification. I saw the moment he read it. His face did not change dramatically. He did not gasp, but there was a shift. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed slightly. The confident set of his shoulders slumped just a fraction. He was reading the name, Douglas Green, relationship father. But it was not just the name. He was reading the notes from the dispatcher. Perhaps he saw the number of times the caller had dialed. Perhaps he saw a note that said, caller sounded calm, or caller asked about arrest procedures. Whatever he saw, it did not match the frantic, terrified plea of a victim. It looked like a transaction. He swiped a finger across the screen. Scrolling down, he read for a long time. The aggressive posture he had held since I walked into the room began to evaporate. He was no longer a predator looking at prey. He was a professional, realizing he had stepped into a pile of something messy and domestic. He turned the tablet slightly away from the glass wall. It was a subtle gesture, almost subconscious. He was shielding the information, not from me, but from the exposure of the public terminal. He understood, in that moment, that this tablet contained evidence of misuse. He understood that he had been weaponized. He looked up at me. The hardness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a wary curiosity. Your father made the call, he stated. It was not a question anymore. I know. I said, he claims you have documents in your possession that you intend to destroy. He said, reading from a new section of the text, he claims those documents are vital to the family estate and that you are fleeing the jurisdiction to dispose of them. I almost laughed. It was so inverted. It was so perfectly backwards. I am flying to the jurisdiction. I said, I am flying to the court. The documents are in that bin behind you. You can look at them. They are notarized affidavits. If I wanted to destroy them, I would have put them in a shredder in my kitchen. I would not have brought them to an airport. The logic was undeniable. The officer knew it. A person destroying evidence does not pack it in a carry-on and buy a ticket to the place where the judge is waiting. He let out a slow breath. He rubbed the back of his neck with his hand. The ticking clock on the wall now read 4:55. My flight was closing. I had missed it. The realization hit me like a physical blow, a sharp ache in the center of my chest. I had missed the flight, but I could not let myself collapse. Not yet. The flight was gone. but the war was still happening in this room. The officer looked at me, and his voice was different now. It was quieter, less performative. "You said your parents want you absent," he said. He leaned in, resting his elbows on the table. "Why?" It was the million-dollar question. Why go to these lengths? Why risk a felony charge for a false report? Why humiliate their daughter in a public place? It was too much effort just for money. People fight over money all the time without calling the SWAT team. I looked at the officer. I wanted him to understand. I wanted him to write this down in his report. I wanted this sentence to be the first thing the judge saw when we subpoenaed this file. "It is not just about the money." "Officer," I said. "Then what is it?" he asked. I thought about my grandfather. I thought about the last time I saw him, frail but sharp, holding my hand in the hospital room. I thought about the lies my parents had told the nurses, the way they had tried to isolate him, the way they were now trying to isolate me. They needed silence. They needed a vacuum where their version of the truth was the only one that existed. "Because if I am not in that courtroom," I said, looking him dead in the eye, "my parents get to tell my story for me." The officer held my gaze. He understood. He knew what it was like to write a report that defined a reality. He knew the power of the narrator. He nodded. Once, a slow acknowledgement of the truth. He tapped the screen of the tablet and closed the digital file. The interrogation was over, but the damage was already done. The officer tapped the screen of the tablet, and the confirmation settled between us like a physical weight. He did not need to say the name aloud for me to know it, but he did anyway. He read it from the digital file with a flat, bureaucratic tone that stripped the revelation of any family warmth. The reporting party was identified as Douglas Green. The relationship was listed as father. Hearing it confirmed by a stranger in a uniform felt like a final severance, a sharp cut that separated my past from my future. I was no longer a daughter. I was a target. I sat perfectly still. I did not flinch. I did not cry. I had shed my last tear for Douglas and Renee 3 days ago, when I realized they were gaslighting me about the funeral arrangements. Now, I only had room for strategy. The officer looked at me, gauging my reaction. When he saw only a cold, stony silence, he decided to proceed. He turned the volume up on the tablet. "I am going to play a portion of the call," he said. "I want you to listen." The audio quality was crisp, terrifyingly clear against the low hum of the air conditioning. There was a brief crackle of static. And then my father's voice filled the small glass room. It was a voice I knew better than my own. It was the voice that had read me bedtime stories. The voice that had taught me how to drive. The voice that had toasted at my college graduation. But it was warped now. It was pitched slightly higher, infused with a breathless, trembling anxiety that I recognized immediately as a performance. "Officer, please, you have to help me," the voice on the recording pleaded. "My daughter is at the airport. She is not well. She stopped taking her medication. She is in a manic state. She told me she was going to go down there and make everyone listen to her. She is angry about the inheritance. She said she might do something drastic to get attention." I listened to the lie. It was constructed with surgical precision. He had hit every keyword that triggers a high-level security response. Medication, manic state, drastic. He was painting a picture of a woman on the edge of a violent break. He sounded like a heartbroken father reaching out for help, a man terrified for his child's safety. It was sickening. The recording continued. "She is aggressive, officer. She has a history of lashing out when she is like this. I am afraid she might hurt someone on that plane. Please, you have to stop her. For her own sake." The officer paused the recording. The silence that rushed back into the room was deafening. I looked at the tablet, staring at the waveform of my father's voice frozen on the screen. He had not just reported me. He had assassinated my character. He had weaponized his role as a protector to strip me of my freedom. The officer was watching me closely. He was waiting for the outburst. He was waiting for the manic woman described on the tape to stand up and scream. Instead, I leaned forward and spoke with a voice that was quieter than the hum of the ventilation system. "There is no medication," I said. I have never been prescribed an antipsychotic or a mood stabilizer in my life. You can check my medical records. You can check the database. That entire call is a fabrication designed to utilize your authority to win a civil dispute." The officer frowned. He was looking at the woman in front of him, composed, articulate, rational, and trying to reconcile her with the chaotic figure described by the heartbroken father on the tape. The cognitive dissonance was visible on his face. "I want that audio preserved," I said. "I want the call log preserved. I want this entire file flagged so that it cannot be deleted or purged after 24 hours. Why?" the officer asked. "Because that recording is evidence," I said. "It is evidence of a false police report. It is evidence of malicious interference with a judicial proceeding. And when I sue my father for this, I am going to play that tape for a jury." The officer hesitated. He looked down at his tablet again, scrolling through the metadata of the dispatch log. His frown deepened. He swiped the screen, reading something that made him pause. "What is it?" I asked. He looked up at me, and for the first time, he looked disturbed, not by me, but by what he was seeing in the system. "He called more than once," the officer said slowly. My heart skipped a beat. "How many times?" The officer tapped the screen, counting. "The system shows 5 attempts in the last 40 minutes. The first 2 calls were routed to the General Information Line. Then he called TSA. Then he called the non-emergency police line. Finally, he called the emergency dispatch." I felt a chill run down my spine. It was not just a crime of passion. It was a rehearsal. Douglas had been shopping for the right agency, the right buzzwords, the right level of panic to get the result he wanted. He had tried the soft approach, realized it would not stop me, and then escalated until he found the trigger phrase that would send armed officers to the gate. He was testing the system. I said, "He was trying to figure out what story would get me detained." The officer did not argue. The data was right there in front of him. A concerned parent calls once, maybe twice in a panic. A manipulator calls 5 times, refining the narrative with each attempt until the trap snaps shut. The officer turned away from the screen and picked up his radio. He murmured something into it, a code I did not understand, requesting a background check on my name. We sat in silence for 2 minutes while the central dispatch ran my life through the federal database. I knew what they would find. They would find a library card. They would find a voter registration. They would find a credit score of 780. They would find absolutely nothing that matched the profile of a dangerous, manic woman. The radio crackled. No criminal history, no outstanding warrants, no protective orders, no history of mental health holds or involuntary commitments. Subject is clear. The officer let out a long breath. He looked at me with a new expression. It was not quite apology, but it was close. It was the look of a man who realizes he has been used as a pawn in a game he did not know he was playing. He set the radio down. "Ms. Green," he said, "I need you to write a statement." I nodded. I reached for the pen and the pad of paper he slid across the table. I did not hesitate. I wrote with a steady hand, the ink flowing dark and permanent onto the page. I wrote the date. I wrote the time. I wrote that I was the victim of a false report initiated by Douglas Green for the express purpose of preventing my attendance at a probate hearing in Florida. I wrote that I had no history of mental illness. I wrote that I requested the preservation of all dispatch logs and audio recordings. I signed my name at the bottom. The letters were sharp and angular. It was not just a statement, it was a declaration of war. The officer took the paper and read it. He nodded, accepting it as the truth. But then, his eyes flicked back to the tablet. He was reading the notes from the dispatch again, searching for something he might have missed. He stopped on a line near the bottom of the screen. "There is one more thing," he said. I braced myself. What else could they possibly have said? "The caller stated that you are carrying documents." The officer said, "He claimed that you stole these documents from the family home and that you intend to destroy them if you are confronted. He said the family is terrified you are going to burn them or dispose of them in the airport." I froze. The blood in my veins turned to ice. I stared at the manila folder sitting in the gray bin across the room. Estate, do not bend. Suddenly, the full architecture of the trap revealed itself to me. It was breathtaking in its cruelty. Douglas did not just want to stop me from getting on the plane. He wanted the police to seize the folder. If the report said I was going to destroy evidence, the police would be obligated to confiscate the threatened items. They would take the folder. They would tag it as evidence. They would hold it in a locker in Denver while the hearing in Florida went ahead without me and without the proof inside that folder. My father was not just trying to stall me. He was trying to disarm me. He wanted to use the police to conduct an illegal search and seizure that he could never have done himself. I looked at the officer. I needed to be very careful. If I showed panic now, if I lunged for the folder, I would validate the lie. I would look like someone trying to hide something. I sat back in my chair. I forced my muscles to relax. I looked at the bin where my life's work was sitting under the glare of the fluorescent lights. "Officer," I said, my voice calm and deadly serious. "My father is half right. I am carrying documents." The officer watched me. He did not move toward the bin. He waited, but he is lying about my intent. I continued, "I am not taking these documents to destroy them. I am taking them to a judge. These are not stolen papers. They are copies of a facility incident report." "What kind of facility?" the officer asked. "The assisted living facility where my grandfather died." I said, "The room seemed to get smaller." The officer was listening now, really listening. He sensed that we had reached the core of the issue. "My parents are claiming that my grandfather changed his will due to dementia," I explained. "They are claiming he was incompetent. They are claiming they were with him every day, caring for him, monitoring his health. They have built an entire legal case on the premise that they were the devoted caregivers and I was the distant, greedy granddaughter." I pointed a steady finger at the folder in the bin. "That folder contains the incident report from the night he collapsed." I said, "It contains the visitor log. It proves that my parents were not there when he fell. It proves that the facility called them 3 times and they did not answer. It proves that my mother did not arrive until 4 hours after the ambulance left." I looked the officer in the eye. "They are not afraid I'm going to destroy that folder." I said, "They are afraid I'm going to open it." The officer looked at the folder. Then he looked at the tablet, where the notes from Douglas Green claimed I was a manic danger to the public. He looked back at me. He saw the logic. He saw the motive. It was clean. It was brutal. And it made perfect sense. He stood up. He walked over to the bin. For a second, I thought he was going to confiscate it. I thought he was going to follow the protocol dictated by the lie. Instead, he picked up the folder. He did not open it. He did not look inside. He held it for a moment, weighing it in his hand. It was light, just a few sheets of paper, but we both knew it was heavy enough to crush a lie worth $3 million. He walked back to the table and placed the folder in front of me. "Keep it close," he said. I put my hand on the folder. The cardboard felt cool under my palm. "You are free to go, Ms. Green," the officer said. I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but I locked my knees. I gathered my wallet and my phone. I looked at the clock. It was 5:15 in the morning. My flight had departed 10 minutes ago. I was stranded in Denver. I was exhausted. I was alone. But I had the folder. And now, I had something else. I had a police report number. I had a witness. I had a recorded confession of my father's malice, stored on a secure server in the airport basement. My parents had tried to bury me. They had tried to erase me. But all they had done was hand me a shovel. I looked at the officer one last time. "Thank you," I said. He nodded. He looked tired. He looked like a man who wanted to go home and wash the stain of my family's drama off his hands. "Get to Florida," he said. I walked out of the glass room and back into the terminal. The noise of the airport hit me like a physical wave. The announcements, the rolling wheels, the chatter of thousands of people moving through their lives. I stood there for a moment, gripping the folder, breathing the recycled air. I had lost the battle for the morning flight, but the war was far from over. I pulled out my phone. The screen was full of notifications, texts from my mother. "Where are you? Call us." I did not reply. I walked toward the airline service desk. I had to find a way to get to Florida. I had to get to that courtroom. My parents thought they had won this round. They thought I was crying in a police station. Broken and defeated, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. The officer did not just open the door and wave goodbye. He stepped out of the glass interrogation room with me, his presence shifting from that of a jailer to a guardian. It was a subtle change, but in the ecosystem of an airport, it was monumental. He walked slightly ahead of me, carving a path through the mourning crowd that had thickened while I was detained. He was ensuring that there were witnesses to my release. He was ensuring that no one could claim I had fled custody or slipped away in the confusion. He walked me all the way to the edge of the TSA checkpoint, a visible endorsement of my freedom. "You are clear to proceed, Ms. Green," he said, his voice carrying over the noise of the rolling suitcases. I nodded, gripping the handle of my carry-on bag with a force that turned my knuckles white. "Thank you, officer." He turned and walked away, back to his post, back to the next potential threat. I was alone again, but this time I was moving with a velocity born of pure desperation. I checked the digital display on the wall. It was 5:30 in the morning. The original flight to Tampa had departed. I saw the status next to the flight number. Departed. It was a red text that felt like a judgment. But I knew there were other flights. There were connections through Atlanta, through Charlotte, through Dallas. I just needed to get to Florida before the judge banged the gavel at 9 o'clock. I did not run. Running in an airport attracts attention. Running suggests guilt or panic, and I refused to give my parents any more footage for their narrative of instability. Instead, I walked with a lethal, clipped efficiency. I moved like a woman who owns the ground she steps on, every 30 seconds. My hand brushed against the side of my tote bag, feeling the rigid spine of the manila folder. Estate, do not bend. It was a physical heartbeat outside of my body. As long as I had that folder, I had a chance. I was halfway to the customer service center when my phone buzzed in my hand. It was a sharp, aggressive vibration. I glanced down, expecting another text from my mother, another plea, another threat, but the screen did not show a text message. It showed an email notification from the airline. "Your itinerary has been updated." My stomach dropped. I stopped walking, forcing the stream of travelers to part around me like water around a stone. I tapped the notification. The email app opened, the little wheel spinning for a fraction of a second that felt like an eternity. Current status: canceled. I stared at the word, canceled. I scrolled down, my eyes scanning the fine print, looking for a mechanical error, a weather delay, a system outage, anything but the truth. But there it was, buried in the automated text at the bottom of the message. Reason for cancellation per customer request. The air in the terminal seemed to vanish. I stood there, surrounded by thousands of people, and felt a vacuum seal around me. I had not requested a cancellation. I had been sitting in a police interrogation room, fighting for my reputation. I had not touched the airline app. I had not spoken to an agent. Per customer request. The realization hit me with the force of a physical slap. My parents. They had not stopped with the police call. That was just the first layer of the siege. While Douglas was on the phone with the emergency dispatcher, acting out his role as the terrified father, Renee must have been on the other line with the airline. They were attacking me on multiple fronts, using every system available to them. I looked at the phone again. How had they done it? I had two-factor authentication. I had a password. Then I remembered the security questions. What is your mother's maiden name? What was the name of your first pet? What street did you grow up on for a normal person? These are security measures for a child trying to escape their parents. They are backdoors that can never be closed. My mother did not need to hack my account. She just needed to be herself. She knew the answers because she was the answer. She knew the name of the golden retriever we had when I was 7. She knew the street address because she still lived there. They had called the airline. impersonated me, or perhaps just claimed to be me, and answered the security questions with the casual confidence of the truth, and the airline agent, thinking they were helping a customer, had canceled my ticket. I felt a surge of rage so hot it almost blinded me. It was a violation of identity. It was identity theft wrapped in the guise of parental concern. They were not just stopping my travel. They were erasing my autonomy. They were making decisions for me, using my name, using my history against me. And there was a darker layer to it. If I walked up to the counter now and tried to rebook, the agent would see a record of erratic behavior. She booked the flight. She checked in. She canceled the flight 10 minutes later. Now she wants to rebook. It looked like chaos. It looked like indecision. It looked like the actions of a woman who was, as my father had told the police, not well. They were building a paper trail of instability. Every move I made, every reaction to their sabotage, was being engineered to look like a symptom of a mental breakdown. I shoved the phone into my pocket. I could not stand there and bleed. I had to move. I walked to the airline service desk. The line was short. Only 2 people ahead of me. I used the time to compose my face. I could not look angry. I could not look flustered. I had to look like the sanest person in the airport. I smoothed my blazer. I checked the folder again. When it was my turn, I stepped up to the podium. The agent was a young man with tired eyes and a name tag that read, David. He looked like he had already dealt with 3 screamers that morning. "How can I help you?" he asked, not looking up from his keyboard. I placed my driver's license on the counter. I placed it gently, with deliberate calm. "My name is Olivia Green," I said. "My flight was just canceled without my permission. I need to be on the next plane to Tampa." David sighed and picked up my ID. He typed my name into the system. I watched his eyes scan the screen. I saw the moment he found the record. His brow furrowed. "Ms. Green," he said, looking up at me with a mix of confusion and irritation. "Our records show that you called in 15 minutes ago and requested a full cancellation and refund. You cited a family emergency. The lie was so perfect it was nauseating. A family emergency. It was technically true, just not the way the airline understood it. The emergency was my family. I did not make that call." I said. My voice was low, steady, and hard as granite. "I have been in the airport for 2 hours. I have not spoken to anyone from this airline until this moment." David turned the screen slightly, as if checking to make sure he had read it right. "It says here the caller verified the account," he said. "Security questions were answered correctly. Mother's maiden name, first pet, I know." I said, "And who do you think would know the answer to my mother's maiden name better than anyone else?" David blinked. He looked at me, then back at the screen. The implication took a second to land. "My mother is trying to stop me from attending a court hearing." I said, "She called you. She pretended to be me. She used her own name to answer your security question." David looked uncomfortable. This was outside his training manual. He was trained for lost bags and missed connections, not familial identity theft. I can't verify that." "Ms. Green," he stammered. "If the security questions were answered, the system treats it as a valid request. The ticket is gone. The seat has probably already been released to standby." I leaned in. I did not raise my voice. I did not pound the counter. I utilized the only weapon I had left, the truth, documented by the authorities. I reached into my bag and pulled out the carbon copy of the voluntary statement I had just signed in the police interrogation room. It was a thin yellow slip of paper, but it had the official seal of the Denver Police Department and a case number written in thick blue ink. 15 minutes ago, when that call was made. "I was in the custody of the airport police," I said. "I was being detained because my father called in a false security threat. I was sitting in a glass room with 2 officers. I did not have access to a phone. I was not canceling my flight. I was fighting for my freedom." I slid the police slip across the counter until it rested next to my ID. "This is the incident report number," I said. "You can call the dispatch office. They will confirm that at the exact moment your system says I was on the phone with you. I was being interrogated about a bomb threat that didn't exist." David stared at the yellow paper. He looked at the timestamp on the police report. He looked at the timestamp on the cancellation note on his screen. The times overlapped perfectly. It was physically impossible for me to have been in two places at once. His face changed. The bureaucratic boredom vanished, replaced by a sudden, sharp alertness. He realized he was looking at a crime scene, not a customer service complaint. Jesus, he whispered, I need two things from you. David, I said, first, I need you to find me a seat on the next flight to Florida. I don't care if it is a jump seat. I don't care if it is in the cargo hold. I have to be in court by 9. He began typing furiously, his fingers flying across the keys. I can get you on the flight to, he said. It leaves in 40 minutes. You will have to drive to Tampa. But you can make it. It is tight, but it is possible. Book it, I said. And the second thing he asked, his eyes still fixed on the screen as he worked the magic of the reservation system. I need the notes, I said. He stopped typing. He looked up. I need you to print the internal call log for the cancellation. I explained. I need the record that shows the caller claimed a family emergency. I need the timestamp. I need the note that says security questions were answered. I can't give you internal documents, he said automatically. That is against policy. I tapped the police slip. David, I said, my parents are trying to prove to a judge that I'm mentally unstable. They are trying to prove that I am erratic, that I make irrational decisions, that I book flights and cancel them on a whim. If I walk into that courtroom without proof that I did not cancel this ticket, they win. They will use your system to destroy me. I looked him in the eye. You can see the fraud right in front of you. I said, you know I didn't make that call. If you don't give me that printout, you are helping them. He hesitated. He looked around the counter, checking for supervisors. He looked at the line of people behind me. He looked at the police slip again. He was weighing his job against his conscience. He bit his lip. Then, he typed a quick command code into the terminal. The dot matrix printer under the counter whirred to life. It made a grinding, rhythmic sound that was music to my ears. He ripped the paper off the feed. He folded it in half, hiding the text. He slid it across the counter along with my new boarding pass. I didn't give you this, he said quietly. You found it. I took the paper. I did not open it yet. I tucked it into the folder, right next to the facility report. Thank you. David, I said. Run, he said. You have 20 minutes to get to gate B12. I turned and walked away. I did not run, but I moved with a speed that defied the exhaustion dragging at my bones. I had the ticket. I had the police report. And now, I had the airline logs. My parents had made a critical error. They thought that by using the systems, the police, the airline, the security protocols, they could crush me with bureaucracy. They thought the weight of the institutions would break me, but they had forgotten one thing. Systems generate records. Every lie they told, every call they made, every fake identity they assumed left a digital footprint. They were not burying me. They were building a ladder for me. Rung by rung, document by document, I headed for the train to the B gates. My phone buzzed again. Another text from my mother. Please just come home. We are only trying to protect you. I looked at the message and felt a cold, hard smile touch my lips. Protect me, I thought. You should be worrying about protecting yourselves. I stepped onto the train as the doors hissed shut. The automated voice announced the next stop. I was moving. I was airborne in spirit, if not yet in body. The trap had tightened, yes. But they had forgotten that when you trap a wolf, you don't just trap the animal, you trap the teeth. And I was bringing every single tooth to Florida. David looked at the screen, his face illuminated by the cold blue light of the airline terminal, and read the note aloud. His voice was low, dropped to a whisper so the restless line of passengers behind me would not hear the details of my family's betrayal. Caller identified as Douglas Green. David read, squinting at the internal log, the notes state that the customer, Olivia Green, is not safe to travel alone. The caller requested the cancellation to prevent the passenger from becoming a liability at 30,000 feet. Not safe to travel alone. The phrase hit me with the precision of a sniper shot. It was not just a lie, it was a strategic narrative. My father was not only claiming I was dangerous to others, he was claiming I was a danger to myself. He was infantilizing me. He was painting a picture of a woman so fragile, so broken, that letting her board a commercial flight would be an act of negligence. It was the kind of language used for runaways, for dementia patients, for people who had lost their grip on reality. I stood at the counter, my hands gripping the edge of the laminate surface. I did not scream. I did not cry. I channeled every ounce of my rage into a single, lucid objective. David, I said, my voice steady. I need you to do two things for me right now. He looked up, waiting. First, I need you to rebook me on that flight to immediately, I said. And second, I need you to print everything you see on that screen. I want the caller identification record. I want the timestamps of when the call came in. I want the internal notes where the agent wrote down exactly what my father said. I want the record of the security questions being answered. David hesitated. I can't just give you internal. I cut him off. Not with anger, but with the brutal reality of my situation. If I don't have that paper, I said, I cannot prove he impersonated me. If I cannot prove he impersonated me, he will use this cancellation as proof that I am erratic and indecisive. Please, print the log. David looked at me for one long second, then he nodded. He typed a command, the printer word, while the paper was feeding through. He tapped another sequence of keys. There is one seat left on the flight to, he said. It is in the last row, middle seat, but it is available. I'll take it. I said, the price is $640, he said, wincing slightly. Since the original ticket was canceled and refunded to the original form of payment, which I assume is your parents' card, you have to pay for this one as a new booking. I did not flinch. I did not argue about fairness. I did not waste precious minutes explaining that I should not have to pay for a seat I had already bought. In the economy of war, money is just ammunition. If I had to pay $600 to save a $3 million estate, it was a bargain. I slapped my credit card onto the counter. Charge it, I said. David swiped the card. The machine beeped. Approved. He tore the receipt off. Along with the long, folded printout of the internal call logs, he handed them to me, then turned back to his screen. I am adding a flag to your profile. Ms. Green, he said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. I am setting it to in-person verification only. No changes can be made to this itinerary over the phone or online. If anyone wants to cancel this ticket, they have to stand right here, present government identification, and look an agent in the eye. Thank you. David, I said, I mean it. He looked at me, grave and serious. Be careful, he said. If they are willing to do this, they are not going to stop just because you got on a plane. I took the documents and shoved them into my folder. I did not look back. I turned and sprinted toward the security checkpoint for the B gates. I did not run like a panic-stricken victim. I ran like an athlete. I checked my watch. Boarding had already started. I had 12 minutes to get to the gate before the doors closed. The train to the concourse felt agonizingly slow. I stood by the doors, tapping my foot, watching the seconds tick by on the digital display. When the doors opened, I bolted. Gate B12 was at the very end of the terminal. I dodged families, sidestepped business travelers, and weaved through the morning crowd. I saw the gate. The line had already dwindled. The agent was reaching for the microphone to announce the final boarding call. I rushed up to the podium, breathless but composed. I pulled up the digital boarding pass on my phone. My hand was shaking, just a little. I held the phone under the scanner. Please work. I prayed silently. Please let the system be faster than my father. The scanner beeped. A bright, beautiful green light flashed on the screen. It was a small victory, a tiny electronic permission, but it felt like oxygen. I walked down the jet bridge, the sound of my heels echoing on the metal floor. I stepped onto the plane. The flight attendants were already closing the overhead bins. I squeezed down the narrow aisle, ignoring the glares of passengers who had been waiting for the last person to board. I found my seat in row 32. I sat down, buckled the belt, and exhaled for the first time in 3 hours. I was on the plane. I was safe. The doors closed. The pilot came over the intercom, announcing our flight time to. I leaned my head back against the seat. I had done it. I had beaten the police report. I had beaten the airline sabotage. I was going to land in Florida, drive to the courthouse, and walk into that hearing with a stack of evidence that would bury my parents. My phone buzzed in my hand. I looked down, expecting a text from Miles, the attorney, or perhaps another threat from my mother. But it was not a text. It was a push notification from the Pinellas County Clerk of Court Automated System. I had subscribed to case updates weeks ago. Case update, hearing time amended. I frowned. Amended, I unlocked the phone and opened the app. I stared at the screen, and the blood drained from my face, leaving me cold and numb. New hearing time. 9 o'clock in the morning. I stared at it. That was impossible. The hearing had been scheduled for 11 o'clock. That was the time on the original notice. That was the time Miles had confirmed. 11 o'clock gave me enough time to land in at 8:30, rent a car, drive the 2 hours to Pinellas County, and arrive with 30 minutes to spare. But 9 o'clock. If the hearing was at 9, I was already late. I would be somewhere over the Gulf of Mexico when the judge called the case. I felt a surge of panic, sharper and more violent than what I had felt in the interrogation room. This was not a delay. This was an execution. The plane was pushing back from the gate. The flight attendants were starting the safety demonstration. I had seconds before I had to put my phone in airplane mode. I dialed the number for the probate clerk's office. It was early, but the clerk started at 8. Please pick up. Please pick up. Pinellas County Clerk, Probate Division. A voice answered. This is Olivia Green, I said, speaking fast and low, shielding my mouth with my hand. I am a party in the Walter Green estate case. I just got a notification that the hearing time was moved to 9 o'clock. Is that correct? One moment, the clerk said. I could hear typing. Yes, ma'am. The time was amended this morning. Why, I demanded. How can you change a hearing time 2 hours before court starts? The clerk's voice was professional, detached. The docket shows an emergency request for accommodation filed by the petitioner's counsel. They cited a scheduling conflict involving an expert witness who had a medical emergency and needed to testify early via video. The judge granted the modification at 7:30 this morning. I closed my eyes. A medical emergency, an expert witness. It was all lies. My parents didn't have an expert witness. They didn't have a medical emergency. They had a strategy. Who requested it? I asked. Knowing the answer, counsel for Douglas and Renee Green. The clerk confirmed. I hung up. The flight attendant was standing over me. Ma'am, you need to turn your phone to airplane mode, she said. I nodded numbly. I switched the phone off. As the plane taxied to the runway, the full scope of the attack assembled itself in my mind like the gears of a complex machine. It was a 3-system attack. First, the airport police report. That was the blunt instrument, designed to physically stop me at the security checkpoint. Second, the airline cancellation. That was the backup. The administrative sabotage designed to strand me in Denver even if the police released me. And third, the court time change. That was the failsafe. If I managed to talk my way out of custody, if I managed to rebook a flight, my parents had ensured that it wouldn't matter. They had moved the finish line. They knew I was flying to. They knew the drive time. They knew that by moving the hearing to 9 o'clock, they had made it mathematically impossible for me to be in the room. The goal was not just to delay me. The goal was to create an empty chair. They wanted the judge to look out at the courtroom at 9 o'clock and see only Douglas and Renee, looking grieving and responsible. They wanted to say, Your Honor, our daughter is not here. She is unstable. She is erratic. She missed her flight. We need to proceed for the good of the estate. I looked out the window as the plane accelerated down the runway. The engines roared, pressing me back into the seat. We lifted off, climbing away from the snow-capped mountains of Denver, banking toward the east. I was trapped in a metal tube at 30,000 feet, hurtling toward a courtroom that would be closed before I even landed. I had the evidence. I had the truth. But truth does not matter if you are not there to speak it. I needed a way to be in that courtroom while I was in the sky. I needed to bridge the gap between the air and the ground. I looked at the Wi-Fi symbol on the seat back in front of me. My parents thought they had checkmated me. They thought the sky was a prison. They were about to find out that the sky was just another place to fight. I reached for my laptop. The seatbelt sign was still on. But I didn't care. I opened the computer. As soon as we reached cruising altitude, I was going to turn this economy seat into a war room. They moved the time fine. I would move the court. The seatbelt sign chimed with a soft, cheerful ping that sounded ridiculously polite, given the violence of my internal world. We had crossed 10,000 feet. The flight attendants were moving down the aisle with their carts, offering coffee and pretzels, simulating a normalcy that I could not feel. I did not want coffee. I did not want a pretzel. I wanted a connection. I flipped open my laptop on the tray table. It was a cramped space, barely large enough for the computer and my elbows, but it was the only office I had. I clicked the Wi-Fi icon in the corner of the screen. I selected the airline network. The portal loaded with agonizing slowness. The little blue bar inching across the screen like a snail moving through glue. The price for full flight access was $25. I would have paid $25,000. I typed in my credit card numbers with fingers that were trembling just enough to make me mistype a digit. I cursed, backspaced, and typed it again. Connect. The screen flashed. You are now connected. I was back in the fight. My first move was not to email my attorney, Miles. It was to check the court docket. I had the case number memorized, burned into my brain like a social security number. I navigated to the Pinellas County Clerk of Court website, logged into the public access portal, and refreshed the page. There it was, a new entry, time-stamped just 40 minutes ago. Emergency motion to proceed in absentia and request for protective measures. I clicked the document. It downloaded as a PDF. I opened it, and as I read the first paragraph, the air in the cabin seemed to vanish. The petitioners, Douglas Green and Renee Green, respectfully move this court to proceed with the hearing scheduled for 9 o'clock without the presence of the beneficiary. Olivia Green. The petitioners inform the court that Ms. Green was detained by law enforcement at Denver International Airport this morning in connection with reported threat behavior. Given Ms. Green's current state of instability and her documented detention for public safety concerns, her presence in the courtroom would pose a disruption to these proceedings. I stared at the screen. My parents had taken the lie, they planted the lie that got me stopped by the police, and they had filed it as a legal fact. They were not just saying I missed my flight. They were telling the judge I was a criminal. They were using the police stop they engineered as proof that I was too dangerous to be allowed in the room. It was a circular firing squad of manipulation. Call the police to create a record of detention. Use the record of detention to bar me from court. Use my absence from court to steal the estate. I checked my email. There was a message from the probate clerk, a woman named Sarah, whom I had spoken to briefly on the phone before takeoff. Ms. Green, regarding your earlier call, the judge has received the petitioner's motion regarding your detention. Unless there is evidence to the contrary, the court is inclined to grant the motion to proceed to ensure the safety of all parties. The worst twist was not the time change. It was this. They were painting me as a physical threat to the judge himself. I hit reply. My fingers hovered over the keys. I needed to attach evidence. I needed to show the judge what was actually happening. Dear Ms. Clerk, I typed, I am requesting permission to submit emergency rebuttal exhibits immediately via email for the judge's review before the 9 o'clock start time. I hit send. I waited. The plane banked slightly to the left. The woman next to me was watching a romantic comedy on her tablet, laughing softly. I envied her ignorance. I envied the simplicity of her morning. 2 minutes later, the reply came. Ms. Green. The court does not accept filings via email. All evidence must be submitted through the e-portal or presented in person during the hearing. The judge does not review ex parte communications. I felt a scream building in my throat, hot and acidic. I could not file through the e-portal because the system took 24 hours to process new uploads. If I uploaded it now, The clerk would stamp it tomorrow. The hearing was in 90 minutes. I took a breath. I forced myself to think like a lawyer. Not a victim. The clerk was following procedure. I had to give her a reason to break it. I had to frame this not as a filing, but as a correction of a fraud being perpetrated on the court in real time. I started a new draft. I needed to be precise. I needed to be terrifyingly clear. I am not asking to file a motion. I wrote, I am asking the court to review proof that the motion currently on the judge's desk is based on a falsified police report. If the judge grants the motion to proceed based on the claim that I was detained for threat behavior, the court will be inadvertently ruling based on perjury. I am currently on a flight to Florida. I am not in custody. I have evidence that the detention was a result of a false report made by the petitioner. Douglas Green. I paused. I needed to make sure there was someone in the room who could vouch for me. Attorney Miles Carver, representing the estate of Walter Green, is in the courthouse building. He can verify my status. Now, the evidence. I minimized the email window. I opened the folder on my desktop where I had saved the photos I took of the documents before I boarded. I had turned the physical Do Not Bend folder into a digital arsenal. I selected 4 files. Attachment 1, DPD, incident report clearance.jpg. This was the slip the officer gave me. It showed the case number. It showed the time of release. But most importantly, it showed the disposition code, unfounded/false report. It was the shield. Attachment 2, airline_call_log_internal, JPG. This was the printout David gave me at the ticket counter. I had taken a high-resolution photo of it on my lap in the gate area. The text was grainy but legible. Caller ID Douglas Green. Customer is not safe to travel alone. It proved my father had impersonated me to cancel the ticket. It was the sword. Attachment 3. Mother_text_screenshot.jpg. I had screenshot the message Renee sent me right before the police stopped me. Turn around. You don't want to do this. If you show up, we will prove you are unstable. It was the smoking gun of intent. It proved that the concern for my safety was actually a threat of blackmail. And then, I hesitated over the 4th file. Attachment 4. Facility_incident_report_Walter Green, PDF. This was the nuclear option. This was the document my parents were terrified of. It was the report from the assisted living facility on the night my grandfather collapsed. My parents had told the family and the lawyers that they were with him all evening, that they were holding his hand, that he was confused and scared and asked to change his will to protect them. But the report told a different story. Resident found unconscious at 7:30 p.m. Emergency services contacted. Family notification attempted Douglas Green, no answer. Renee Green, no answer. Staff remained with resident until transport. Family arrived at hospital at 11:15 p.m. It proved they were not there. It proved they lied about the timeline. It proved the entire narrative of the deathbed will change was a fabrication because the people who supposedly heard his last wishes were not even in the building when he lost consciousness. I attached it. I looked at the email. It was heavy with data, but it needed a cover letter. It needed a summary that the judge could read in 10 seconds. Judges are busy. They do not read novels. They read executive summaries. I wiped my palms on my trousers. I typed. I did not use adjectives. I did not use emotional language. I did not say I was devastated or angry. I stripped the sentences down to their skeletal truth. Statement of facts regarding Olivia Green 1. I was detained at Denver International Airport at 4:15 this morning based on a call from Douglas Green, which the Denver Police Department has classified as a false report. See Attachment 1. 2. My flight was canceled without my consent by a caller identified as Douglas Green, who answered security questions to impersonate me. See Attachment 2. 3. The petitioner. Renee Green sent a text message threatening to label me unstable if I attended the hearing, establishing a premeditated motive to obstruct my appearance. See Attachment 3. 4. The petitioner's claim of threat behavior is contradicted by the police clearance which states no threat was found and no charges were filed. 5. The petitioner's motion to proceed without me is an attempt to suppress the attached incident report attachment 4, which proves they were not present when the decedent collapsed. Contradicting the basis of the contested will, I read it over, 5 sentences, 5 nails in the coffin of their lies. I hit send. The little blue bar whooshed across the top of the screen. Message sent. I sat back. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked out the window. The clouds were a thick, white blanket below us, hiding the earth. I was suspended in a void, fighting a battle on the ground using invisible signals bouncing off satellites. It felt surreal. It felt like I was a ghost trying to haunt a courtroom from 2,000 miles away. I waited. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. The plane shook with a sudden jolt of turbulence. The seatbelt sign pinged again. I grabbed the laptop to keep it from sliding off the tray. The internet connection flickered. Reconnectings. No, do not lose the signal now. I stared at the Wi-Fi icon, willing it to turn solid. It blinked. It spun. Then, it held. New message. I clicked it so fast, I almost cracked the trackpad. It was from the clerk. Ms. Green, I have printed your email and the attached exhibits. I brought them into chambers. The judge has reviewed your submission. I stopped breathing. Reviewed. He had seen it. He had seen the police report. He had seen the text. The judge has instructed me to inform you that the motion to proceed in absentia is denied. He will address the contents of your exhibits regarding the petitioner's conduct at the start of the hearing at 9 o'clock. Attorney Carver has been notified. I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. The woman next to me glanced over. Concerned. I am fine, I whispered, staring at the screen. I am just working. I was not just working, I was winning. The judge had denied the motion. That meant the hearing would not finish without me. But the second part of the message was even more critical. He will address the contents of your exhibits. My parents were walking into that courtroom in 45 minutes expecting to see an empty chair and a sympathetic judge. They were expecting to rubber stamp their theft. Instead, they were going to walk into a room where the judge had just read proof that they were liars, manipulators, and potential felons. I looked at the time on my laptop. 8:15. The hearing started in 45 minutes. I was still 2 hours away from landing. I could not be there physically, but I had just sent a ghost into the room to take my seat. I typed a quick email to Miles Carver. Miles, check your inbox. I sent the nuclear packet. The judge has it. Do not let them speak until he reads the airline log into the record. I sent it. I closed the laptop partially, just enough to dim the screen. I leaned my head back against the headrest. My hands were still shaking, but it was no longer from fear. It was from the adrenaline of the counter-strike. I imagined the scene in the courtroom. I imagined Douglas adjusting his tie, looking solemn. I imagined Renee dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. I imagined them sitting at the plaintiff's table, confident in their victory, unaware that the email I just sent was sitting on the judge's bench like a loaded gun. They had tried to use the systems of the world to stop me. Police, airlines, courts. They forgot that systems work both ways. They forgot that the same bureaucracy they used to trap me could be used to document their crimes. I looked down at the clouds. We were moving at 500 miles an hour. I was coming for them. And thanks to 5 sentences and a Wi-Fi connection, the truth was going to get there before I did. The vibration of my phone against the tray table was a jagged buzz that cut through the low drone of the aircraft engines. I looked at the screen. It was Miles Carver. I shoved my wired earbuds in, my hands moving with the frantic precision of a bomb disposal technician. I tapped the green answer button and hunched over the laptop, shielding the microphone with my hand to keep my voice to a whisper. Miles, I breathed. I am here. Did the judge get the email? The voice on the other end was breathless. Surrounded by the echo of a marble hallway, Miles was moving fast. He got it. Olivia. But you need to listen to me. They are in there right now. I just stepped out of the pre-trial conference room. Their lawyer is telling Judge Harrison that you were not just detained. They are telling him you were removed from the terminal in handcuffs. The blood drained from my face. Handcuffs. They had escalated the lie again. They were painting a picture of a violent criminal extraction. They are claiming it was a psychotic break. Miles continued, his voice dropping as someone walked past him. They said you assaulted an officer. They are asking the judge to appoint Douglas as your emergency guardian ad litem right now. They want control of the lawsuit and control of you. I felt a wave of nausea. A guardianship. That was the endgame. If they got that, they could dismiss the lawsuit against themselves on my behalf. It was diabolical. Go in there. Miles, I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. Go in there and burn them down. I am going in, Miles said. Stay on the line. Keep your phone on mute. I am going to put you in my breast pocket. I want you to hear this. There was a rustling sound, the scratch of fabric against the microphone, and then the audio quality shifted. The ambient noise of the hallway was replaced by the heavy, solemn silence of a courtroom. I could hear the distinct sound of a heavy door closing. I cranked the volume on my laptop up to the maximum, pressing the earbuds so deep into my ears they hurt. I was 30,000 feet in the air, sitting in a middle seat between a sleeping teenager and a woman knitting a scarf. But my consciousness was projected 2,000 miles away into Pinellas County Courtroom 4. I heard the bailiff's voice, distant but clear. All rise. There was the sound of shuffling chairs, the rustle of suits. Then, a deep, authoritative voice cut through the static. It was Judge Harrison. I had never met him, but his voice sounded like gravel and old oak. Be seated, the judge said. We are back on the record in the matter of the estate of Walter Green. Counsel, I have reviewed the motion to proceed in absentia filed by the petitioners. Mr. Vance, you were speaking regarding the status of the beneficiary. Miss Green, I heard a throat clear. It was Vance, my parents' expensive bulldog of an attorney. His voice was smooth, polished, and dripping with fake sympathy. Yes, Your Honor. As we discussed in chambers, this is a tragic situation. Mr. and Mrs. Green are devastated. We have received confirmation that their daughter, Olivia, was taken into custody by airport police in Denver early this morning. She was exhibiting violent threat behavior. She was restrained. I bit my lips so hard I tasted copper. Restrained. She is currently unavailable due to her incarceration, Vance continued. Given her mental state, we believe it is unsafe to pause these proceedings. We ask that the court grant the motion to proceed and consider the emergency petition for temporary guardianship to ensure Misty Green receives the medical care she clearly needs. I heard the pause. The silence stretched. I could imagine my parents sitting there, Douglas with his head bowed, Renee clutching a handkerchief, the picture of grieving parents dealing with a wayward, crazy child. Then I heard Miles. His voice was closer to the microphone, loud and sharp. Your Honor, if I may, Mr. Carver, the judge said. Do you have news regarding your client? I do. Your Honor, Miles said, and I must object to Mr. Vance's characterization of the events. In fact, I must object to the entire fictional narrative being presented to this court. I heard a gasp. It might have been Renee. Fictional Vance snapped. Mr. Carver, this is a serious. The judge's gavel banged once, a sharp crack that made me jump in my seat. Quiet, the judge ordered. Mr. Carver, explain yourself. Miles took a breath. I could hear the rustle of paper. He was holding the printouts. Miss Green is not in custody. Your Honor, she is not in handcuffs. She is currently on Flight 492 She is listening to these proceedings right now. There was a murmur in the courtroom. I felt a surge of triumph. I am here, Dad. I am listening. Miles continued. I have just forwarded an email to the clerk from Ms. Green. It contains a time-stamped incident report from the Denver Police Department. I would ask the clerk to read the case number and the disposition code into the record. There was a pause. I heard papers being shuffled. Then the clerk's voice, dry and administrative. Exhibit A, submitted by the respondent. Denver Police Department Incident Report. Number 44920. Time of release 5:15 in the morning. Disposition code unfounded. False report. The words hung in the air. Unfounded. False report. I waited for the explosion. The judge spoke. His voice was no longer neutral. It was cold. Mr. Vance, the judge said, your motion claims your client's daughter was detained for violent behavior. This police report states she was released because the report against her was a fabrication. Can you explain the discrepancy? Vance sounded flustered. Your Honor, my clients were acting on the information they had. They received a call. They made the call. Miles interrupted. The judge spoke again. I am looking at Exhibit B, the judge said. It appears to be an internal call log from the airline. It identifies the caller who canceled Ms. Green's ticket as Douglas Green. I heard a chair scrape against the floor. It was Douglas. I knew that sound. It was the sound of him standing up to take control when things were not going his way. Your Honor, Douglas said. His voice was shaking, but not with fear, with indignation. We were protecting people. Olivia was... She was sounding erratic on the phone. We didn't want her on a plane if she was going to cause a scene. We have a duty to public safety. I closed my eyes. He was still doing it. He was still trying to sell the lie. The judge let the silence stretch for 5 seconds. It was a torture tactic. Protecting the public, the judge repeated. His tone was incredulous. You canceled her ticket and called the police to protect the public from a probate hearing. We were trying to help her, Douglas insisted. She is not well. Sit down, Mr. Green, the judge barked. It was a command, not a request. I heard the chair scrape again. Douglas sat. Then I heard a sob. It was a high, thin sound. Renee, Your Honor, please, Renee cried. She is our daughter. You don't understand the text messages she sends. She is cruel. She threatens us. We are just terrified for her. It was a good performance. I had seen her do it 1,000 times. She could summon tears like a weather system. The judge did not soften. Mrs. Green, the judge said, I am looking at a screenshot of a text message provided in Exhibit C. It is from you to your daughter. It reads, if you show up, we will prove you are unstable. The sobbing stopped instantly. It was as if someone had cut the power to a speaker. That does not sound like fear. Mrs. Green, the judge said, that sounds like blackmail. I squeezed my eyes shut, tears leaking out from under my lids. Finally, someone saw it. Someone looked at the weeping mother and saw the predator underneath. The judge continued. We have a timeline here that is very troubling. At 4 o'clock, a call is made to the police. At 4:15, a flight is canceled by someone impersonating the passenger. At 7:30, a motion is filed to move this hearing to an earlier time. And now, at 9 o'clock, you are asking for guardianship. The judge paused. I could hear the faint hum of the courtroom's ventilation system. This looks less like a family emergency and more like a coordinated tactical strike to prevent a beneficiary from accessing this court. The judge said. Vance tried to intervene. Your Honor, surely you are not suggesting I'm not suggesting anything. Counsel, the judge snapped. I am reading the documents, and I'm looking at Exhibit D, the facility report, the nuclear option. This is an incident report from the Golden View Assisted Living Facility. The judge said, it lists the persons present at the time of Walter Green's collapse. The room went deadly silent. This was the moment. This was the $3 million moment. Mr. Vance, the judge said, your petition to admit the new will states that your clients were at the decedent's bedside from 6 o'clock in the evening until he was transported. Yes, Your Honor, Vance said, his voice hesitant. This report says the facility called Douglas and Renee Green 3 times between 7:30 and 8 o'clock and received no answer. The judge read, it says they arrived at the hospital at 11:15. I heard a gasp from the gallery, probably the court reporter or a clerk. That is a 3-hour gap, the judge said. A 3-hour gap, during the exact window of time when this new will was supposedly drafted and signed. Your Honor, the records must be wrong. Douglas blurted out. The staff. They are incompetent. They didn't see us come in. The judge ignored him. I am denying the motion to proceed in absentia. The judge ruled. His voice was iron. And I am denying the emergency petition for guardianship with prejudice. There is absolutely no evidence before this court that Olivia Green is incapacitated. In fact, based on the speed with which she filed these rebuttals from an airplane, she appears to be the most competent person in this entire case. I let out a breath that shuddered through my entire body. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up in the aisle of the plane and cheer. The matter is continued until 2 o'clock this afternoon. The judge ordered, "We will wait for Ms. Green to land. We will wait for her to drive here, and we will hear her testimony in person." But the judge was not finished. "And counsel," the judge added, his voice dropping to a lower, more dangerous register, "I want to be very clear. This court does not look kindly on the weaponization of law enforcement to settle probate disputes. I heard papers shifting. Mr. Vance, you have until 2 o'clock to produce every text message, email, and call the log between your clients regarding the events of this morning. If I find that there was a conspiracy to file a false police report, I will not just sanction your clients." The judge paused. The silence was absolute. "I will refer this matter to the state attorney's office for review regarding charges of perjury, filing a false report, and identity theft. Do I make myself clear, crystal clear?" "Your Honor," Vance whispered. His voice was weak. He sounded like a man who realized he was standing on a sinking ship. "Court is in recess until 2 o'clock, the judge said. The gavel banged. The audio on the line dissolved into the noise of people standing up. I heard the distinct, sharp click of briefcase latches. I pulled the earbuds out. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold them. I looked out the window. The sky was a brilliant, blinding blue. I was still in the air. I was still alone in a metal tube, but everything had changed. My parents were no longer the grieving children of Walter Green. They were suspects. They were liars who had been caught in the harsh fluorescent light of a courtroom. I looked at the laptop screen. The Wi-Fi signal was still strong. I opened a new email to Miles. I heard it all. I typed, "Do not let them leave the building. I am landing in 40 minutes. I am coming." I closed the laptop. I leaned back. The plane began its descent, the nose tipping forward toward Florida. The engine pitch changed. A lower, deeper roar. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was not happiness. It was not relief. It was the cold, hard weight of power. My parents had spent my entire life telling me who I was. They told me I was weak. They told me I was fragile. They told me I needed them to survive. They had tried to erase me, and in doing so, they had handed me the pen. Now, I was the one writing the story. And I was going to finish it. The humidity of Florida hit me the moment the automatic doors of the Tampa International Airport slid open. It was not just heat. It was a physical weight, a heavy blanket that smelled of asphalt, jet fuel, and the swampy decay of the tropics. After the dry, thin air of Denver, it felt like I was walking into a different atmosphere, one that was slower, thicker, and harder to breathe in. I walked to the rental car garage, my heels clicking on the concrete, a solitary rhythm in the late afternoon lull. I was exhausted. My body felt brittle, as if my bones had been hollowed out by the adrenaline of the last 8 hours. I had fought a war from 30,000 feet, and I had won the first battle, but the victory brought no joy. It only brought a grim, vibrating tension. I clutched the manila folder to my chest. It was no longer just a collection of papers. It was my passport. It was my shield. It was the only proof in the world that I was sane, that I was telling the truth, and that I existed outside of the warped narrative my parents were spinning. I checked into a generic business hotel near the courthouse, a place with beige walls and artwork that looked like it had been bought by the pound. I did not want luxury. I wanted anonymity. I wanted a door with a deadbolt and a room where no one knew my name. I threw my bag on the bed and sat down, staring at the blinking light on the hotel room phone. It was a relic of a bygone era, but the red light pulsed with a persistent, annoying rhythm. I ignored it. I checked my cell phone instead. There was a voicemail. It was from my father. I stared at the screen. The timestamp was from 20 minutes ago. Right after I had landed, I pressed play, bracing myself for the anger, for the screaming, for the erratic accusations he had made to the police. Olivia. His voice said. It was smooth. It was calm. It was the voice of the man who used to teach me how to ride a bike. I know you are in town. Your mother and I are we are worried about you. We know things got heated today. Let's not make this ugly tomorrow. We are a family. We can settle this before we go into that room. Call me. The disconnect made my skin crawl. Let's not make this ugly. He was the one who had called the police. He was the one who had impersonated me to cancel a flight. He was the one who had tried to have me arrested. And now, he was leaving a voicemail that sounded like he was inviting me to Sunday brunch. It was gaslighting of the highest order. He was trying to reset the board. He wanted me to doubt my own reality. He wanted me to think that perhaps I had overreacted, that perhaps I was the one making it ugly. I did not call him back. I deleted the message. I would not give him the satisfaction of a response. I met Miles Carver 2 hours later in the hotel lobby bar. It was a dark, quiet space, smelling of lemon polish and gin. Miles looked older than I remembered. He had been my grandfather's attorney for 30 years. A man of integrity in a suit that had seen better days. He stood up when he saw me, offering a hand that felt dry and papery. You look like you walked through a hurricane. Olivia, he said, pulling out a chair for me. I flew through one. Miles, I said. I sat down, placing the folder on the table between us. It sat there like a loaded weapon. So, tell me, what is their next move? The judge shut them down on the detention motion. What do they have left? Miles sighed, signaling the waitress for a club soda. He looked tired. He rubbed his face with his hand, a gesture of weariness that told me the fight was far from over. They are pivoting, he said. They realize the brute force approach failed. The judge knows they lied about the airport. So now, they are going to attack the will itself. They are filing a motion to invalidate the new will based on undue influence. I laughed. A harsh, short sound. Undue influence. I lived 2,000 miles away. I saw grandfather maybe 3 times a year. They lived 10 minutes down the road. They controlled his doctors, his groceries, his visitors. If anyone had influence, it was them. That is exactly their argument. Miles said quietly. They are going to argue that because they were the primary caregivers. Because they were the ones wiping his brow and holding his hand. They know his true mind. They are going to claim that you, the distant granddaughter, used emotional manipulation during phone calls to poison him against them. They are going to paint themselves as the saints and you as the whisperer in the dark. I felt the anger rise again, hot and sharp. They were not saints. They were vultures. They are going to claim they were with him every moment of that final week. Miles continued. They will say he was lucid, that he was heartbroken by your absence, and that he begged them to change the will to protect the family legacy from your instability. I reached for the folder. I opened it. I pulled out the document that I had emailed to the court from the plane. The incident report from the Golden View Assisted Living Facility. They can claim whatever they want. Miles, I said, sliding the paper across the polished wood of the table. But this piece of paper says they are lying. Miles picked up the report. He adjusted his glasses, squinting in the dim light. Read the timeline, I said. Miles read it aloud, his voice low. Resident found unresponsive at 7:30 in the evening. Staff attempted to contact emergency designees. Douglas and Renee Green, no answer. Voicemail left at 7:35. Voicemail left at 7:45. He looked up at me. Keep reading. I said, look at the arrival time. Family arrived at St. Anthony's Hospital at 11:15 at night. Miles read, that is nearly 4 hours. Miles, I said, 4 hours where my grandfather was alone, unconscious, and dying. 4 hours where the supposed saints were nowhere to be found. I leaned forward. They told the estate attorney that grandfather changed the will verbally at 8 o'clock that night. I said, they said he squeezed their hands and told them to take everything, but at 8 o'clock, he was in an ambulance, alone, and they were not answering their phones. Miles looked at the paper, then back at me. A slow realization spread across his face. If they were not there, he said, then the verbal codicil is a fabrication. And if they lied about being there, then their entire claim of being the devoted, constant caregivers collapses. It destroys their credibility. It proves they were negligent, not devoted. Exactly. I said, this report does not just disprove the will change, it proves they abandoned him. And they are terrified that the judge is going to see it. That is why they tried to stop me at the airport. They knew I had this. Miles nodded slowly. He tapped the paper with his index finger. This is good. Olivia, he said, this is very good, but you have to understand something. In probate court, documents are only as good as the people who authenticate them. Your parents are going to attack this report. They are going to say it is a clerical error. They are going to say the nurse forgot to log them in. They are going to say the clock was wrong. Let them try. I said. My phone buzzed on the table. It was an email notification. I glanced at it, expecting a spam message or a receipt from the airline. It was from the administrator at Golden View. Subject notification of record update request. I frowned. I picked up the phone. I opened the email. As I read the text, the blood in my veins turned to ice water. Dear Ms. Green, the email read, as the primary contact on file for the late Walter Green, we are notifying you that we received a request this evening to amend the visitor logs for the date of January 12th. A representative for the family contacted our records department claiming there was an error in the sign-in times for Douglas and Renee Green. They have requested that the log be updated to reflect an arrival time of 7:15. I dropped the phone on the table. It made a loud clatter that drew stares from the couple at the next table. What is it? Miles asked, alarmed. I stared at him, my mouth dry. They are trying to change it, I whispered. Change what? The log, I said. I shoved the phone toward him. They just called the facility. Tonight, while we are sitting here. They are trying to get the administrator to retroactively change the arrival time to 7:15. Miles read the email. His face went pale. 7:15, he repeated. That puts them there 15 minutes before he collapsed. That puts them in the room. If they change that record, I said, my voice shaking with fury, then my report, the one I have in this folder, becomes a draft, or a mistake. They will walk into court tomorrow with a corrected version and say that mine is invalid. Miles sat back, his eyes hard. This is not just litigation anymore. Olivia, he said, this is tampering with evidence. This is fraud. They are trying to rewrite history administratively because they cannot win factually. He looked at the folder. Do you have the original? He asked. I nodded. I have the certified copy I picked up 3 days ago. It has the raised seal. Keep it safe, Miles said, urgent. Do not let it out of your sight. Tomorrow morning, we are going to walk into that courtroom, and we are going to drop a bomb, but we need to be ready. He pulled out a notepad and began scribbling furiously. I am going to issue a subpoena for the facility custodian tonight, he said. I am going to demand that the night nurse who wrote that report appear by Zoom. We are not going to let them paste over the truth with a polite email request. I watched him write. I felt a cold, dark clarity settling over me. This was what they did. This was what they had always done. When reality did not suit Douglas and Renee Green, they simply edited it. They retouched the family photos. They changed the narrative. They smoothed over the cracks with money and charm and sheer, relentless pressure. They had done it to me my whole life. You are too sensitive. Olivia, that didn't happen. Olivia, you are imagining things. Olivia, they had gaslit me until I almost broke. And now, they were trying to gaslit a legal system. They were trying to gaslit the death of my grandfather. But they had made a mistake. They had left a paper trail. I picked up the folder. I ran my hand over the label. Estate, do not bend. I am not going to let them do it. Miles, I said. We won't, he promised. He tore the page off his notepad and handed it to me. This is the plan for tomorrow. We let them present their case. We let them tell the judge about the undue influence. We let them lie under oath about being at his bedside. And then, when they are finished, when they have locked themselves into their story, we show the judge the timestamp. I finished. And we show him the email from tonight, Miles added. We show him that 12 hours before the hearing. They were trying to cook the books. That shows consciousness of guilt. That shows they know they are lying. I stood up. I felt heavy. But it was the heaviness of a weapon, not a burden. I am going to bed. Miles, I said, I need to be sharp tomorrow. Get some sleep. He said, lock your door. I walked back to my room. The hallway was empty and silent. I let myself in and threw the deadbolt. I propped a chair under the handle, a paranoid habit I had developed in college that suddenly felt very necessary. I took a shower, washing the airport grime and the stale airplane air off my skin. I stood under the hot water until the mirror fogged up, hiding my reflection. I did not want to look at myself. I did not want to see the resemblance to them. I had my father's eyes. I had my mother's jawline. I carried their genetics like a curse. I dried off and put on a clean t-shirt. I crawled into the stiff hotel bed. The sheets smelled of bleach. I placed the folder on the nightstand, right next to my head. I reached out and touched it, checking to make sure it was real. The voicemail from my father played in my head again. Let's not make this ugly. It was too late for that. It had been ugly for years. It had been ugly since the day I realized that my parents did not love me. They only loved the version of me that reflected well on them. And when I stopped being that reflection, when I became a person with my own voice and my own memories, I became a threat. They were willing to arrest me. They were willing to strand me. They were willing to erase me from the legal record. And now, they were willing to erase the truth of my grandfather's death just to secure a payout. I turned off the lamp. The room plunged into darkness, save for the sliver of light under the door and the neon glow of the city outside the window. I closed my eyes, but I did not sleep. I lay there, listening to the hum of the air conditioner, thinking about the room I would walk into tomorrow. A courtroom is just a room with furniture and a flag, but it is also a crucible. It is a place where stories go to die or to be reborn as facts. Tomorrow was not about the money. I did not care about the house or the stocks or the bonds. I cared about the record. I cared about the truth. If I won, I would walk out of there with nothing but my name. But it would be my name, not the name they allowed me to have, not the name of the unstable daughter or the manic woman. I rolled over, my hand brushing the cool cardboard of the folder. My parents had spent their lives building a fortress of lies. Tomorrow, I was going to pull the cornerstone out and watch it fall. The silence of the hotel room felt less like emptiness and more like the deep breath before a scream. I was ready. Pinellas County Courtroom 4 smelled of lemon oil and ancient dust. It was a smell designed to intimidate, a scent of institutional power that had absorbed decades of lies and judgments. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Miles Carver, my hands folded on the polished wood surface. I was wearing the same navy blazer I had worn in Denver. The fabric now slightly wrinkled from a flight across the country, but I felt cleaner than I had in years. I watched the heavy oak doors swing open, and my parents walked in. Douglas and Renee Green arrived dressed like grief itself. My father wore a charcoal suit that was impeccably tailored, his tie a somber shade of black that suggested deep, mournful respect. My mother wore a modest black dress with a string of pearls, her makeup understated, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. They looked stable. They looked responsible. They looked like the kind of people who served on charity boards and hosted neighborhood potlucks. They walked with a synchronized slowness, a performance of sorrow that was so perfect it made my stomach turn. They did not look at me. They looked straight ahead at the judge's bench, their chins held high in a posture of righteous endurance. They took their seats at the defense table. Their attorney, Vance, leaned in and whispered something to them. Douglas nodded gravely. Renee dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue she had pulled from her purse before she even sat down. It was theater. It was a high-stakes play performed for an audience of one Judge Harrison. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Harrison entered, his black robe billowing around him like a storm cloud. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and looked out over the room. His gaze lingered on my parents for a fraction of a second too long before shifting to the lawyers. "We are back on the record," the judge said. His voice was a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "We are here to address the petition to invalidate the last will and testament of Walter Green, as well as the motion regarding the conduct of the parties prior to this hearing. Mr. Vance, you may proceed." Vance stood up. He buttoned his jacket with a sharp, confident snap. He walked to the center of the room, positioning himself so that he was blocking my view of the judge. It was a power move, a physical attempt to erase me from the sight line. "Your Honor," Vance began, his voice smooth and cultivated, "we are here today because of a tragedy. The death of Walter Green was a blow to this entire family, but what makes this tragedy unbearable is the conduct of the beneficiary, Olivia Green." He turned and pointed a finger at me. It was not an aggressive point. It was a gesture of pity. "My clients have tried to protect their daughter," Vance said. "They have tried to shield her from her own worst impulses. But as we saw this morning, Olivia is emotionally volatile. She is impulsive. She was detained by police at a major international airport just 6 hours ago. While she was released, the fact remains that she was involved in a security incident that required law enforcement intervention. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I did not move. I kept my face blank. Miles placed a hand on my forearm, a silent command to stay still. Vance continued, pacing slowly in front of the bench. "This pattern of behavior is relevant, Your Honor, because it speaks to the state of mind of the family. It speaks to why Walter Green, in his final days, chose to entrust his estate to his son and daughter-in-law. He knew Olivia was unstable. He knew she could not handle the responsibility of this inheritance. He changed his will not out of pressure, but out of protection." Vance paused for effect, letting the word protection hang in the cool air. "We argue that the airport incident is proof of her erratic nature," Vance concluded. "A woman who gets stopped by police on the way to her grandfather's probate hearing is not a woman who should be managing a $3 million estate." Vance sat down. My parents nodded in unison, a choreographed gesture of agreement. Miles stood up. He did not button his jacket. He did not pace. He stood rooted to the floor like an old tree. "Your Honor," Miles said, his voice raspy but clear. "Mr. Vance talks about patterns. Let us talk about patterns." Miles picked up the stack of documents we had prepared. "We have submitted into evidence the audio preservation request for the call made to the Denver Police Department," Miles said. "We have also submitted the call logs. These records show that Douglas Green called the police 5 times in 40 minutes. Miles looked at Douglas. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw tightening. "The first call was to the general line," Miles continued. "The second was to TSA. The third, fourth, and fifth were to emergency dispatch. In each call, the language escalated. In the first call, he said he was worried. By the 5th call, he was claiming his daughter was a violent threat to the aircraft." Miles turned to the judge. "This is not the behavior of a concerned father. Your Honor, this is the behavior of a man shopping for a response. He did not stop until he found the words that would trigger an armed response. That is not protection. That is a tactical strike, and the motive is purely civil. He wanted her in a cell so he could be in this chair alone." The judge looked at Douglas. "Mr. Green," the judge said. Douglas stood up, smoothing his tie. "Yes, Your Honor." "Did you contact the police this morning?" the judge asked. "I did," Douglas said. His voice was steady, practicing the calm he had used on the voicemail. "I was terrified. Olivia has been difficult lately. I truly believed she might hurt herself or someone else. I was acting out of love." "And the airline?" the judge asked. "Did you contact the airline?" Douglas hesitated, just for a microsecond, but in a courtroom. A microsecond is an eternity. I called to see if she had boarded. Douglas said, I wanted to know if she was safe. The judge picked up a piece of paper from his bench. It was the internal log I had printed at the counter. This log says the caller identified himself as Douglas Green and requested a cancellation. The judge read, it says the caller answered security questions to verify the account. Douglas shifted his weight. In my panic, I may have tried to stop her from flying if I thought she was dangerous. I was just trying to keep her on the ground. You impersonated her. The judge said flatly, you used her security answers to cancel a contract she paid for. That is not panic. Mr. Green, that is fraud. Douglas opened his mouth to argue, but the judge held up a hand. Sit down. Miles stepped forward again. Your Honor, the airport incident is just the latest chapter in this fiction. Miles said, the petitioners are asking this court to believe that they are the responsible, devoted caregivers who were with Walter Green every step of the way. They claim that because of their constant presence, the decedent changed his will verbally on the night of January 12th. Miles walked back to our table and picked up the manila folder. He opened it and took out the certified incident report from the assisted living facility. But if we look at the timeline, Miles said, the story breaks. He handed the document to the bailiff, who carried it to the bench. This is the incident report from the night Walter Green collapsed. Miles said, please look at the timestamp for the emergency call. 7:30 in the evening. The judge looked at the document. I see it. He said, now please look at the notes regarding family notification. Miles said, staff called Douglas Green. No answer. Staff called Renee Green. No answer. Miles turned to face my parents. They were sitting very still. Renee was gripping her purse so hard her knuckles were white. And finally, Miles said, please look at the arrival time. The judge turned the page. Family arrived at St. Anthony's Hospital at 11:15 at night. He read. Miles let the silence stretch. It filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Your Honor, Miles said quietly, the petitioners claim the will was changed at 8 o'clock at the facility. They claim Walter Green held their hands and spoke his final wishes to them. But according to this report, at 8 o'clock, Walter Green was unconscious in an ambulance, and his devoted son and daughter-in-law were not answering their phones. They did not arrive until nearly 4 hours later. Renee stood up. It was a sudden, jerky motion. That is not true, she cried out, her voice cracking. The report is wrong. We were there. The nurse, she must have forgotten to write us in. It was chaotic. We were there the whole time. Vance stood up. Trying to calm her, Mrs. Green, please, she kept talking, her voice rising in pitch. The log is inaccurate. You can't rely on a piece of paper written by some night shift nurse. We were there. The judge looked at her. Mrs. Green, you are suggesting the facility records are in error. Yes. Renee insisted. They are completely wrong. Miles walked back to the table. He picked up his phone. He looked at me, a brief, grim nod. Then he looked at the judge. Your Honor, Miles said, if the records are in error, it is interesting that the petitioners only noticed this error last night. Miles produced a printed copy of the email I had received in the hotel bar. We received this email notification from the facility administrator at 10 o'clock last night. Miles said. He handed the paper to the bailiff. The email states that a representative for the family contacted the records department yesterday evening requesting a retroactive change to the visitor logs. Miles explained. They asked the facility to manually alter the arrival time to 7:15. The judge took the paper. His eyebrows shot up. And Your Honor, Miles added, the most damning detail is not the request itself. It is the origin of the request. The facility attached the original email chain. The request to change the log came from an email address, rgreenpinellas-county-realty. She worked for Pinellas County Realty. It was her work email. She had sent a request to falsify evidence from her office account, likely sitting at her desk, thinking she was just tidying up some paperwork. Renee sank back into her chair. Her face had gone the color of ash. Douglas closed his eyes, the mask of the grieving. Responsible family had not just slipped, it had shattered on the floor. She tried to change the record 12 hours before this hearing. Miles said, "That is not a correction. That is a cover-up, and it proves they know exactly where they were that night. They were not with Walter Green." The judge stared at the email for a long time. Then he looked at my parents. His expression was one of profound distaste. "Mr. Vance," the judge said, "do you have an explanation for why your client was attempting to alter subpoenaed evidence the night before a trial?" Vance stood up slowly. He looked defeated. He looked like a man who realized his clients had not told him the whole truth. I was not aware of this communication." "Your Honor," Vance stammered, "I cannot speak to it." The judge turned to me. "Ms. Green," the judge said, "please take the stand." I stood up. My legs felt heavy. But I walked to the witness box. I placed my hand on the Bible. I swore to tell the truth. I sat down. The wood of the chair was hard against my back. I looked out at the courtroom. I saw my parents, small and diminished in their expensive clothes. "Ms. Green," the judge said. He did not ask Miles to question me. He did it himself. "Did you travel here today for the sole purpose of attending this hearing?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said. My voice was quiet, but it did not shake. "And did you have any intention of causing a disruption on your flight or at the airport?" he asked. "No, Your Honor," I said. "I only wanted to be here. I wanted to be here to ensure that my grandfather's voice was heard." The judge nodded. "And when you were detained, did you threaten the officers?" "No, Your Honor," I said. I gave a statement. I provided my identification, and I held on to the folder that contained the incident report. "Why was that report so important to you?" the judge asked. I looked at Douglas. He refused to meet my eyes. "Because," I said, "I knew my parents would tell a story about love and devotion. I knew they would sound convincing, but I knew that report was the only thing that could prove that when my grandfather needed them most, they were not there. I knew that if I did not bring that paper into this room, the truth would die with him." The judge looked at me. He looked at the report on his bench. He looked at the email from Renee. He gathered the papers into a stack. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "We are going to take a brief recess," the judge said. He did not look at the lawyers. He looked at the bailiff. "I want the courtroom cleared," the judge ordered. "But I want the exhibits sealed and brought to my chambers immediately. I need to review the totality of this deception before I make a ruling. And Mr. Vance, I suggest you use this time to explain to your clients the penalties for perjury and evidence tampering." The gavel banged. The sound echoed like a gunshot. My parents flinched. Miles squeezed my shoulder. "It is over, Olivia," he whispered. "He knows." I sat in the witness box for a moment longer, watching my parents argue in hushed, frantic tones with their lawyer. They looked desperate. They looked trapped. They looked exactly like what they were, two people who had built a house on sand, and the tide had finally come in. I stood up and walked back to the plaintiff's table. I did not look back at them. I did not need to. The story they had written for me was gone. The story I had written with timestamps and flight logs and police reports was the only one left on the record. And in 10 minutes, the judge was going to read the final chapter. The bailiff's voice cut through the heavy silence of the courtroom like a guillotine blade dropping. "All rise." I stood up. My legs felt like they were made of wood, stiff and heavy from the adrenaline crash that was beginning to set in. Beside me, Miles Carver buttoned his suit jacket with a slow, deliberate movement. Across the aisle, my parents stood as well. Douglas was rigid, his jaw set in a line of defiant tension. Renee was dabbing her eyes again. But the performance had lost its energy. The air in the room was different now. Before the recess, it had been a battleground of competing narratives. Now, it felt like a room where a decision had already been made, and we were just waiting for the sentence to be read. Judge Harrison swept into the room. He did not look at the lawyers. He did not look at the gallery. He walked straight to his high leather chair, sat down, and placed a stack of papers in the center of the mahogany bench. He adjusted his reading glasses, the lenses catching the harsh overhead light. He let the silence stretch for 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 20 seconds. It was a silence that forced everyone to breathe in the weight of what was about to happen. "Be seated," the judge said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a resonance that made the back of my neck prickle. We all sat. The sound of wood scraping against the floor was the only noise in the room. "I have reviewed the exhibits submitted by the respondent," the judge began, his eyes fixed on the papers before him. "I have reviewed the police incident report from Denver. I have reviewed the airline call logs. I have reviewed the text messages, and I have reviewed the email correspondence regarding the visitor logs at the assisted living facility." He looked up then, and his gaze landed squarely on my father. "Mr. Green," the judge said, "this court sees many family disputes. We see arguments over money. We see arguments over property. We see arguments over sentiment, but rarely does this court see a coordinated effort to weaponize the institutions of public safety to silence a beneficiary." Douglas opened his mouth to speak, but the judge raised a single finger. "Do not interrupt me," the judge warned. The tone was lethal. The judge continued, "You filed a motion this morning asking to exclude your daughter from these proceedings based on her alleged instability. You cited a police detention as proof of that instability, but the evidence shows that you orchestrated that detention. You created the emergency you then claimed to be the victim of." The judge picked up the police report and held it up. "This is what I call medicalized character assassination," the judge declared. "You attempted to label your daughter as mentally unwell to strip her of her legal rights. You used the police as a tool to validate a lie. You used the airline safety protocols to restrict her movement. And you used this court's schedule to try and close the door before she could walk through it." He dropped the paper back onto the bench. "This court will not reward obstruction," the judge stated. "This court will not reward manipulation, and this court will certainly not reward a party that attempts to tamper with evidence regarding the decedent's death 12 hours before a hearing." Renee let out a small, strangled sound. She looked down at her hands, unable to meet the judge's eyes. Therefore, the judge ruled, his voice rising with the authority of the state. "I find that the petitioner's motion to proceed in absentia contained material factual misrepresentations. I am denying the petition for guardianship with prejudice." He turned his attention to the lawyers. "Furthermore," the judge said, "I am removing Douglas Green and Renee Green as the proposed personal representatives of this estate." Douglas jerked forward in his seat. "Your Honor, you cannot." "I can and I am," the judge snapped. "A fiduciary must be trustworthy. A fiduciary must act in good faith. A man who impersonates a beneficiary to cancel her flight is not a man who can be trusted to manage her inheritance. I am appointing an independent, court-approved professional fiduciary to administer the estate of Walter Green. You will have no control over the assets. You will have no control over the timeline. You will have no control over the distribution." I felt a rush of air leave my lungs. This was the true victory. My parents did not just want the money, they wanted the control. They wanted to hold the purse strings so they could keep pulling me back in, making me dance for every dollar. The judge had just cut the strings. Now, regarding the will itself, the judge said, Miles stood up. "Your Honor, before you rule on the validity of the will, we have one final piece of evidence to submit. It was entrusted to my firm by Walter Green 3 months before he died, with instructions that it be opened only in the event of a contest." My parents froze. They had not known about this. I had not known about this. Miles reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope. It looked old. The paper was yellowed at the edges. "Your Honor," Miles said, walking to the bench, This is a notarized letter from the decedent. It speaks directly to his state of mind and his relationship with his son and daughter-in-law. The judge took the envelope. He opened it with a silver letter opener. He unfolded the letter. He read it in silence. His expression softened, turning from the hard lines of judgment to something more sorrowful. "Read it into the record, Mr. Carver," the judge said, handing it back to Miles. Miles turned to face the room. He held the letter with both hands. He began to read. And suddenly, my grandfather was in the room with us. "To the court, and to my granddaughter Olivia." Miles read, "If you are reading this, it means Douglas and Renee have done exactly what I feared they would do. They have tried to take what is not theirs. For the last year, I have lived in a prison of their making. They call it care, but it is control. Douglas pressures me daily to sign over the accounts. Renee plays access games with the phone. She unplugs it when Olivia calls. She tells me Olivia is busy. She tells me Olivia does not care. But I know the truth. I covered my mouth with my hand, tears spilling hot and fast down my cheeks. He knew. All those times I called and got no answer. All those times I thought he didn't want to talk to me. He knew. I am changing my will not because I am confused." Miles continued reading. "But because I am finally thinking clearly. I want Olivia to have the resources to be free of them. They will say I was sick. They will say I was influenced. Do not believe them. They only care about the money. I care about the girl who used to read to me in the garden. I give it all to her, in the hopes that she can finally run far enough away that they can never find her again. Signed, Walter Green." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a holy silence. My parents were destroyed. They were not just defeated legally. They were exposed morally. Their own father had written a testimony from the grave that stripped away their mask of benevolence and revealed the greed underneath. The judge looked at my parents. He did not look angry anymore. He looked disappointed. The court upholds the validity of the last will and testament dated January 12th. The judge ruled. The claim of undue influence is dismissed. The letter from the decedent, combined with the facility reports proving the petitioners were absent during the critical hours, makes it clear that the only undue influence in this case came from Douglas and Renee Green. The judge picked up his gavel. "Olivia Green is confirmed as the sole beneficiary with full legal standing," he said. He paused. "Now, regarding sanctions," the judge said. His voice hardened again. "Mr. Vance, your clients wasted the court's time. They wasted the airport police's time. They wasted the airline's time. I am ordering Douglas and Renee Green to pay all legal fees incurred by the respondent in relation to this hearing. They will also pay the cost of the flight cancellation and the rebooking. And," the judge added, looking directly at Douglas, "I am forwarding the transcript of today's proceedings, along with the police report and the airline logs. To the district attorney, I cannot charge you with perjury today, but I can ensure that the people who can charge you have everything they need." Douglas went pale. The threat of criminal charges was real. He was a man who cared about reputation above all else. A felony charge would ruin him. The gavel banged. Case closed. The sound was the sweetest thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of a heavy door locking, keeping the monsters out. I stood up. Miles turned to me and smiled. It was a tired, crinkly smile. "We did it, Olivia," he said. "We did it." I whispered. I gathered my folder. "Estate, do not bend." It was bent now. It was worn and creased, but it had held. We walked toward the exit. My parents were standing in the aisle, blocking the path. They looked smaller than they had when they walked in. They looked like two people who had aged 10 years in 1 hour. Renee was crying. And this time, I think the tears were real. She was crying for herself. She was crying for the money she had already spent in her head. Douglas stepped in front of me. His face was a mask of cold fury. He leaned in close, so close I could smell his expensive cologne, the scent that had always meant authority to me. "You think you won," he whispered, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "You destroyed this family for money. I hope you are happy. You will never be one of us again." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had called the police on me. I looked at the man who had lied to the airline. I looked at the man who had let my grandfather die alone while he waited for a lawyer to draft a fake will. He tried to use shame. It was his favorite weapon, but I was not wearing his shame anymore. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I looked him dead in the eye. I didn't destroy anything. "Dad," I said. I tapped the folder against his chest. It was a light tap, but he flinched. "You put your name on every lie," I said. I just read them out loud. I stepped around him. I walked past Renee, who could not even look at me. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and walked out into the hallway. The air in the corridor was cool and still. I took a deep breath. It did not smell of lemon oil anymore. It smelled of freedom. Miles walked beside me, his briefcase swinging rhythmically. "What will you do now?" he asked. I thought about it. I had $3 million. I had a house. I had a future. But those were just things. What I really had was the knowledge that I could survive them. I had the knowledge that when they threw the entire weight of their world against me, I did not break. "I am going to go home," I said. "And then, I am going to live a life they cannot edit." I walked out of the courthouse and into the blinding Florida sun. The heat hit me, but it didn't feel oppressive anymore. It felt like a cleansing fire. I watched the cars moving on the street, people going about their days, unaware of the war that had just ended in courtroom 4. Inheritance is money. Money can be spent. Money can be lost. But truth is power. My parents had tried to steal both. They had walked away with neither. I adjusted my sunglasses, gripped my folder, and started walking. I had a plane to catch. And this time, no one was going to stop me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I have to ask you, would you have boarded that plane after the first stop? Knowing your own parents were willing to use the police and paperwork to erase you, let me know in the comments below. And please tell me where you are listening from. I would love to connect with you and hear your thoughts on how this ended. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Helena Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story get heard by even more people. Stay strong, and never let anyone write your story for you.